Now, whatever market category you choose is going to come with a set of baggage. And that's good because positioning is all about creating the right assumptions in the minds of your buyers. And when I say it's good that whatever you say is going to come with baggage, it's good if you choose correctly. It's bad if you don't.
Welcome to Under the Hood of Developer Marketing, the podcast devoted to developer marketing, relations, evangelism, and advocacy. I'm Stathis Georgakopoulos, and I'm your host. In each episode, I welcome a guest from the developer marketing world. We talk about best practices, challenges, lessons learned, and share insights, data, and experiences to help you boost your DevRel game, talk to, and engage with developers. This podcast is brought to you by SlashData, the leading analyst of the developer economy, and DevRelX.com, a hub devoted to providing resources for developer marketing professionals, including developer ecosystem trends, news and job openings, webinars, a book, and a bi-weekly digest you can subscribe to. Access them all at DevRelX.com. Hello and welcome to a new episode of Under the Hood of Developer Marketing Season 3. I really hope you enjoyed our latest episode featuring a great panel discussion from the Future Developer Summit on what developer-led growth means. Make sure to join us for episode 3 in October, and you can also watch more presentations and discussions at futuredeveloper.io. Allow me to welcome today's guest, Emily Omier, who is the leader behind Emily Omier Consulting. Emily, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
As a child, what did you want to be when you grew up?
I wanted to be a trapeze artist.
Oh, wow.
That was unexpected.
Yeah, it wasn't. This is the best part about, this question. Children, dream big, and we did too, at least. So trapeze artist has come up for the first time, and I really love it, to be honest.
Well, I actually would have been very surprised if it was coming up for the second or third time.
Wow, that's awesome. So do you want to tell us more about yourself? How did you end up in your current role, or what was your journey from dreaming to be a trapeze artist to having your own consulting company on, developers?
So I will say that the trapeze artist dream wasn't totally random. I was involved with a local circus performance group when I was a kid, like starting from age 3. So that's why I had that dream. But I did not ultimately pursue it for a variety of reasons. But I've had a fairly interesting and unusual path. When I was younger, when I was in my 20s, I traveled a lot. I taught English in Spain, had a couple sort of quote unquote internet businesses that were not financially successful. We'll just say that. But I had a company called Sputnik Guides that had podcast tours. Yeah. Then I went to journalism school and I became a journalist. That's kind of how this starts, because then I got into tech journalism, and then from there I got into content marketing for technology companies, and then that sort of led into what I do now, because you work. So I was doing consulting as a content marketer, and you start to realize that for a lot of companies, the problem wasn't their content marketing. Their problem was more fundamental, and that their problem was their positioning. And so that's sort of how I ended up working on positioning with companies, is after, working with a lot of them and just seeing that they were bringing me in to do something that is necessary, but isn't going to be effective unless you have the foundation in place.
Yeah, that's a great journey, and I'm really excited, to have a fellow person that comes from a marketing background instead of, a more traditional path, coming from a technical background and turning to, marketing or advocacy or relations. So I'm really excited to hear what you're going to share with us today. Now, with the world slowly reopening, what is something that you will be doing again soon after a long time?
Well, good question. I am really excited about going to concerts, particularly like outdoor concerts. It's summer, so that I'm really excited about. And then, honestly, just like the basic stuff, like going to restaurants. I wouldn't actually say that I'm much of a, I don't go to restaurants super regularly, or I didn't, I should say, but I'm was even thinking about how I should like have a plan to go try all the new restaurants in town.
Yeah, that sounds super cool. And I'm sure the local restaurants will love it, jumping from one to another after so long. Any artist that you really like to see in a concert?
It's funny. I'm actually not even thinking that way. It's more what I'm looking forward to is more like the concerts in the park with the local bands, not the like big stadium concerts. I'll probably not go to those.
Okay, then supporting your local scene is always it's always great.
Yep.
Now, Emily, let's talk data. Can you please pick a graph from devralex.com/trends and tell us what stands out to you and why?
Sure. Let me pull one of these up. So the one that I was looking at earlier was actually about the buying patterns of Kubernetes users. And I work with a lot of companies that are in the Kubernetes ecosystem. So I found it really interesting to see that Kubernetes users were more likely to make buying decisions than, shall we say, regular front-end developer teams. I also think it's interesting there was a graph also showing that developers in general are making a lot, or at least influencing a lot of buying decisions. And then the Kubernetes users were influencing them even more.
Yes, and I just want to note that for anyone who's interested in what you say, for the Future Developer Summit episode 2 that just was live last month, early in mid-June, we will soon have available at futuredeveloper.io a presentation we did from our latest survey data, where we can see how developers are influencing decisions and how developers are becoming more decision makers for buying decisions within a company. Mm-hmm. So I just want to say, if you're interested in finding more about this, you can go to futuredeveloper.io and look up the past presentations, and you can access it. It's free. Now, Emily, you kind of mentioned it in the beginning, but now it's the time, for us to discuss it deeper. When we say positioning, what do we mean?
Excellent question. So positioning is about first of all, positioning is about how do you answer when somebody says, what is your product? Like, let's say, X, what is X? Like, how do you answer them? You're going to answer them with basically the market category that you think your product is. X is a continuous integration platform. X is a testing tool. X is a deployment engine. And that's your positioning. Now, whatever market category you choose is going to come with a set of baggage. And that's good because positioning is all about creating the right assumptions in the minds of your buyers. And when I say it's good that whatever you say is going to come with baggage, it's good if you choose correctly. It's bad if you don't, because the key to good positioning is creating the right set of assumptions so that when you're having a conversation about your product, people aren't asking you like, quote unquote stupid questions. They're asking relevant questions that are about how your product is unique, how it's different from other alternatives. They're not asking about either features that are like so basic that they're just totally table stakes, or asking about things that are like totally oddball. You can't even figure out why they're asking in relation to your product. Then there's actually a second part of positioning, which is figuring out who's going to benefit the most from your product. And no matter how awesome your product is, it's going to be more valuable for some people than for others. And you want to be marketing to the people who are going to get the most value out of your product, because they're going to pay you more for it so you can have higher prices. B, they're going to convert better. So you're going to have, better conversion rates throughout your entire funnel. And then just bottom line, you're going to get more leads in general because you're going to be able to focus your marketing and your sales on this, really specific market and talk to them. There's one other point I wanted to make about positioning, which is that even though this is a marketing podcast, positioning is not just marketing. And one of the things, the sort of common misconceptions I see among founders is that positioning is a marketing problem, and they try to delegate it to their marketing person. And positioning is really foundational to your company. And, like I said at the beginning, it's the answer to like, what do you do? What's your product? And that market category, that sort of label that you're slapping on your product, that has to be consistent every time anybody connected with your company opens their mouth. And as a founder, or as a CEO, even a non-founder CEO, you have to be involved. That is very core to your business.
Yeah, I completely agree. And, this may be a developer marketing podcast, but, we know how developer marketing is extremely different than consumer marketing, for example. So in our case, how is positioning developer tools different from consumer product positioning, for example?
Yeah, so there's actually a couple layers here. So there's how is B2B product positioning different from consumer product positioning, and then there's how is developer tool positioning different from other B2B products. And I'm actually going to address that second part because I think it's the most interesting for listeners. The first thing to keep in mind when you're selling or marketing a developer tool is that the competitive alternatives are different than if you're selling a B2B, a B2B software. Usually, I'm not talking about like, an industrial machine or something. So if you're selling a B2B software and you're selling it to, let's say, accountants, those accountants aren't going to think, this is a kind of a cool tool, but wouldn't it be really great if I just like made this myself? No, an accountant is never going to have that thought about software. If you are selling to developers, that is a legitimate competitive alternative that you're going to run into every single time. Every company is going to have considered if they should DIY this project. A lot of times it's not a good idea, but it is a really serious, there's a really serious build versus buy debate in the developer ecosystem. That's point one. And then point two is that there's open source to deal with. So a lot of companies that I work with have an open source component to their business. There's different open source business models, but regardless, if you have an open source project, you have to pay attention to positioning that open source project, to positioning whatever your paid offering is, and then to managing the relationship between the two. And you can't ignore any of those pieces because they're sort of key to having a cohesive story about your company, and then also to making sure that people are choosing the right option for them, and that you're marketing the correct option to the right type of user.
Yes, I just love how you made the distinction, between, developers choosing to DIY the project internally versus, other, I'll say, job categories who will never think about it, as you said with the accountant's example. I really love this point.
I mean, an accountant is never going to have that thought. And I think there's also a very different dynamic. This gets sort of more into your marketing strategy, but there's a very different dynamic in terms of like sort of your company status as a thought leader and the relationship that you have with your users. I find that it's very different for developer tools companies than, again, for the like software for accountants. I don't think that accountants, I guess I'm not a specialist, but I don't think that accountants look to their software provider like a place that they're going to go and learn and become better accountants. They look at it as a tool. But developers actually often look to developer tool companies and their software as, a place to find community, whether it's in the open source project or even in like just closed source projects, like community around being a user of a particular software is a real thing in the developer community. And they look at companies as like a way to educate themselves about their craft to become better developers in a way that I do not think you see from software companies in other B2B markets.
Yeah, this is definitely spot on. I agree 100%. Speaking about the developer audience, which is the one we care about, especially in this podcast. So for developers, why is it important how you will choose to position your product?
So, even though I've just talked about the ways in which developers are different, developers are still human beings and they make assumptions just like the rest of us. And they are going to have baggage around particular terms. And it's not always logical, but it is a real thing. So one company I was working with recently had a product that it's really like the goal of this product is to improve your cloud security. And before we worked together, they were describing it as a cloud security product. And the problem is that among people in the cloud ecosystem and in the security ecosystem, so there's that sort of crossover, cloud security has a certain, it carries a certain baggage. The term carries a certain baggage that didn't apply to what this product did. So when you think of cloud security, you'd often think of like policy management and, checking against best practices. And that's not what this product did. So developers, they have their own baggage, just like everyone else. They have terms that they're going to understand in a specific way. So it matters just as much, and perhaps even more, actually, for the developer marketplace. I want to just add one more thing, which is I said perhaps even more, which is the reason I think it might matter even more for developers is because developers often have even less tolerance for BS. And I don't think anybody has like a high tolerance for BS, but this is something that people say about developers. I think it's true, and this also comes with the fact that developers can look under the hood of your product often if they want to, so they can kind of sniff out whether or not things are as you've portrayed them. If their assumption about your product is incorrect, and they feel like they've been misled, intentionally or not. Sometimes it's just that your positioning is bad. It's not that you meant to mislead them. That can really affect your reputation. So you really don't want to make developers feel like you're misleading them.
I do totally second the concept that especially developers have very low tolerance, for BS. And as you said, the fact that they can look under the hood of your product, to see how it works is a really key factor here. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for mentioning that. Now, before we, started recording this episode, we were talking and you said that neither open source projects or commercial projects should ever try creating a new category. Can you please explain why you say that?
Oh, absolutely. So everyone wants to create a new category. This is true, I think, not just of developer tool companies, but of everyone. Because if you're starting a company, you're like, oh my God, nobody has ever done anything at all, even remotely close to what I'm doing. It's totally unique. I'm going to, create some amazing new market category to describe what I'm doing. The problem with this is that people don't make any assumptions about this new category when they hear it. They just feel confused because they've never heard it before. And that is not what you want. So confused people do not buy. And new categories are created. But particularly if you are a startup and you don't have 5 years to start being profitable, and you would like to get some people to buy your product now, you're going to find that with creating a new category, you have to make a huge investment into your marketing effort that may or may not pay off because it's absolutely not guaranteed that just because you've created a new category, you're ultimately going to win that category. In fact, what generally happens is that you spend a ton of money creating a new category, and then you run out of money, and then somebody else comes in and takes advantage of the fact that you've created this new category for people. What's a better strategy is that you want to find a way to put together terms that people already understand to create something, to create a market category that is unique. And there's a couple ways it could be unique, but you don't want to try to create you don't want to try to create a category that's totally novel and that people just aren't going to know what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you have mentioned, the term assumptions has come up quite a few times now. So you mentioned that creating new categories can lead to confusion a lot of times. So for the case of the developers, how can this new category affect them?
Well, let me back up. I want to talk just because since you mentioned it, to really quickly touch on the idea of assumptions, because sometimes the word assumptions has like negative connotations, and we make assumptions. We're human beings. We make assumptions. You see the sun shining, and you think, oh, it's probably hot today. That's fine. Like this is how human beings understand the world. Assumptions get us into trouble when they are, when they're sexist or racist or things like that. They get us into trouble when they are, when they're incorrect. And that's when we notice them. And positioning is really about leveraging the power of assumptions so that you have assumptions that are correct about your product. When you make an assumption and it turns out to be correct, you just everything just seems smooth. You won't notice it. It's when your assumption about a product turned out to be incorrect that you really notice it, and it sort of really, hits you in the face, and that feels really uncomfortable. Assumptions, like I said, they're not good or bad. They just are, and there's some kinds of assumptions that are bad, but in general, human beings make assumptions like hundreds of times every day about every type of situation we encounter. And they are very powerful when it comes to marketing and to positioning. So then next, how do developers, how are they affected by confusion and by the confusion created from new categories? So developers, like I said, they're human beings. They get confused just like other human beings. And when they encounter a tool that doesn't fit into what they understand as the types of tools that they should be using, it's confusing to them. And if they're really busy and they don't really understand how this is going to make their life different, they're just going to move on. And that's why creating a new category is kind of sort of a dangerous way to approach your positioning.
Yeah, and thank you also for making the distinction, for assumptions. As a, fellow marketing guy myself, this has come up quite a few times, where we sometimes do confuse assumptions with bias, for example. But, assumptions are key, especially in, positioning a product, because you need to see what it does and what comes along with it. And also it has a lot of times it has to do with people's expectations of it. Now, you are obviously the best person to talk positioning. Which do you feel is the best positioning strategy to follow?
Yeah, so the best positioning strategy that I always recommend is what I consider the big fish in this small pond. That is taking some market category that people already understand and sort of slicing off a piece of it, some piece of it that's not being served by the other tools that are already in that market, and focusing on that. And so segmentation is important here. The key to being a big fish in a small pond is you want to be targeting companies that have some sort of characteristics in common that is genuinely not served by the existing tools that are in that existing market. And I say companies, serving developers, right, that are not being served by the tools that are in that market. I actually like to think in the developer tool space to think of characteristics of applications and characteristics of workloads, because that's ultimately the most important thing, rather than necessarily the characteristics of, say, the company. Developers are going to be thinking about like, oh, I have an IO bound application that has to do X. And you could have your product say, we do X for IO bound applications. That's very specific. So the key and how you get to be the totally unique is, tying yourself to a larger market ecosystem, but only trying to address a small piece of it.
Yeah, I think this is very key. Instead of going, as we said, that which is not the best strategy, with something totally new, linking what you have to an existing product category, for example, and then working on that to differentiate on what is it that you're offering that is new.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned segmentation within this part. How important is it, in this strategy?
Yeah, segmentation is like extremely important in positioning. If we think of there's sort of two parts of positioning. One is defining your market category. Two is segmenting your market. It's really key. I work mostly with the companies that consider themselves startups. They don't have infinite budgets. They need to focus on the people who are most likely to buy their product. So, and I like, just to back up, this applies equally to open source projects too. Especially like, let's say you're just one developer and you have this open source project you're doing on your free time, and you like it to grow. You also need to segment, because there's things that you're going to do to promote your open source project, but you don't have infinite time either. Regardless of whether you're promoting a side project, a side open source project, or you are a venture funded startup, like your pocket and your time and your resources are not infinite. You need to focus on the people who are going to be most likely to, in the open source example, not just become users, but become community members and contributors to your project. In the case of the paid product, that are going to buy your product, and not just buy it, but they're going to love your product and they're going to tell other people about it. Segmentation allows you to figure out, what are the characteristics of the people who are going to love this product or this open source project. You do, like, ultimately you are marketing to people. So you do want to think about, like, what are the characteristics of the workload that they're working on? What is their persona? Like, what is their job title? We can talk about developers as sort of this like almost monolithic group, but they're very non-monolithic. There's SREs, there's front-end developers, there are, Kubernetes administrators. Like, there's all kinds of people, and we could say like software engineers as an umbrella term, but there's then there's directors of engineering and VPs of engineering, and they have their needs as well. So you want to think about what the persona is, the characteristics of their application, and then obviously like the characteristics of the company as well that they're working on, assuming that this isn't just a product for hobbyists. And it has to do also with thinking like, what's the pain point that you're solving? Why does anybody even need your product? Who is going to encounter that pain point? For whom is this pain going to be like really severe? Even if everybody experiences this pain, sometimes for some people, the pain is going to be like, kind of annoying. And for some people, it's going to be like really critical to their business. Well, you want to go after the people for whom this pain is like really a threat to their business.
Speaking from us at Last Data, where we do developer research, I really have to say that, as you mentioned, developers are definitely not a monolithic group. And actually, we've seen segmentation is key, in understanding your developer audience. It might be the reason why your product or new effort or new endeavor you're doing it might, make or break. So I totally second that. You mentioned segmentation, which is obviously a very key component in this strategy. Now, if you could make a short how to position your product or project effectively checklist, what would be in that checklist?
Excellent. So the first step is to understand who are your best fit users. And I'm trying to use neutral language here so we can include both paid products and open source projects. But who are your best fit customers or your best fit users? And a best fit user is just like, these are the people or companies that you wish you could clone. They closed a deal with you really fast. They don't ever haggle on price. They are always willing to like give you a case study or a testimonial or something like that. They're just really excited about your product. Once you figure out who these people are, it's a good idea to talk to them and to really make sure you understand what pain points they are using your product to solve, and what they would do if your product disappeared tomorrow. And when you ask about, what would you do if your product disappeared tomorrow? What you're trying to figure out is what the competitive alternatives are. And competitive alternatives are not competitive products. So they are things like we would DIY. We would, in some companies, it's not just we would DIY, but like we would create an open source project ourselves. We would just ignore the problem and live with it, have some sort of manual process to fix this pain. So it's not just competitive products, but you want to understand what those competitive alternatives are. And then compare the competitive alternatives to your product in terms of what are the unique attributes of your product or your open source project compared to the thing that your best customers would do if you didn't exist. The important thing is to not get too caught up here in who your like quote unquote competitors are in the marketplace, because sometimes the people you think of as your competitors are not what your customers would actually do if you didn't exist. Unique attributes can be both like your amazing features, but it could also be like your support. It could be your pricing structure. For example, maybe you have usage-based pricing and a competitive alternative has like a flat monthly fee. That would be a unique attribute. It could even be, that if we're talking about an open source project, like the fact that it is open source can be a selling point, a selling quote unquote. It can be an advantage for the right type of user. So once you have your unique attributes, and most companies are going to have like dozens, like 20, 30, then you want to boil those down into value themes. So think about what value each of those attributes provides. And you're going to end up grouping these into like either from 1 to 5. You don't want to go more than 5 value themes. If you only have one value theme, that's also fine. Sometimes companies get really anxious about that because they think they're like not good enough just because they only have one value theme. It's fine to have only one value. Just like knock that value out of the park and you're good. In fact, it's like then you get to be even more focused, but get really clear on what the value, so what the like larger business value is, not just your feature. So then you have like 3 to 5 values that you provide really well. And then next, once you've clarified the value that you provide, then you want to think about who cares a lot about that value. And that's how you start segmenting your market, is by thinking through and also basing this on the characteristics of your best fit customers. Like what characteristics do those best fit customers have in common? And what can they tell you about the type of people who get the most value out of your product? How can you then, get really clear on those characteristics so then that you can speak directly to those people? And then based on all of that, you're going to get your market category. Market category is the last thing that you address, even though it's sort of the core of your positioning. But after you've gone through all of those steps, you want to do what it was really like almost a brainstorming exercise where you think about how to slap the right words, slap the right market category onto your product that is going to make people immediately understand the value that you provide. So in my experience, like this is it's a little trial and error. You have to sort of throw out a bunch of ideas, get the team to sort of articulate, like when we say X, I think Y, and then eventually you'll come to the market category that's able to best to describe what your product is and create that correct set of assumptions.
Thank you very much for going through that checklist, which I really believe is the gist of this episode, where everything that we discussed comes together. And if you don't mind, I really like to summarize it, and please correct me if I've missed something. So you start with segmenting actually your users, trying to see who your product addresses. Then you identify the unique attributes of what you have to offer, whether it is an open source project or your product. Then the business value you provide, and then you try to figure out who cares a lot about this value that you're offering, which is, again, segmenting the market. So this is the second time, because we mentioned it before, segmenting has come up. The first one is on the first step, where you segment to the users, and then segmenting the market. And then finally, after you have all these, you can focus on selecting your marketing category, which is actually where you will be positioning your product.
Yep, exactly.
Perfect. So thank you very much for that, Emily. I think this is the best way we could close this episode, with a hands-on guide on how to position the product or project that it's new to the market and to the users. So if, however, someone wants to hear more from you, how can they reach you?
So you can come to my blog, my website. So I am at positioningopensource.com. You can also come to my website at emilyomier.com, but it's harder to spell. And I also host a podcast, The Business of Cloud Native. So you can listen to the podcast. And the podcast addresses sort of how entrepreneurial engineers can succeed in building a business around developer tools, around tools for other engineers. Go to my website. I'm also on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. And I'm also on Twitter. Emily Omier is my Twitter handle. And I'm trying to be more active on Twitter. So feel free to follow me on Twitter and send me a message. I'm working on being more active there.
That's great. And don't worry, I will help with the spelling. I will make sure to include your website on this episode's description. So if you guys have trouble spelling it, you can always look in the description and find it there. So to close on a positive note, what's one good thing that happened in 2020?
I love this question because I actually thought that not being able to do a lot of things was in some ways a positive. I think in sort of our modern lives, we can get really caught up in going from one place to another, doing a lot of activities, and it can be a little bit overwhelming. And so, honestly, I thought that in many ways, not having that option open to me was really freeing.
I cannot agree more. It was also a great chance, to take a stop from going, fast or too fast at some point, and seeing there are other things, or just taking it slower was great.
Exactly.
Emily, thank you so much for joining us for this episode.
Thank you. This was a really great conversation.
And thank you to our listeners for listening to Under the Hood of Developer Marketing, the podcast devoted to developer marketing and relations. You can listen to all episodes, find free resources, and the latest news at devrolx.com. You can also subscribe to our bite-sized bi-weekly digest or follow us on Twitter at /datahq. Thank you very much.